Hello again. Thanks for viewing our Expert Backup Now help videos. In this video, we're going to take a look at the next step in setting up the software right after the initial install, which is the default settings. Now these settings can be changed at any time if you need to change them after the software is installed, but they're really pretty basic and you're going to leave them pretty much where they are unless you have any special requirements, but I wanted to go over them anyway. So the first one to look at is temp folder. Now what this is where your files are going to be stored locally on the machine so that they can be compressed and then encrypted before they're sent through the internet to the remote servers. So unless you have either space constraints or some sort of performance issue on one of these drives, you're going to leave it right where it's at. If you have very little room left on this drive and you're backing up very large files, you may want to move this to a D drive or another local drive, but I wouldn't recommend moving it to any other drive but a local drive on the machine just for performance reasons. The next area, and we can expand and contract these just by simply using the arrows on the side. So the next section to look at is revision rules. Now what revisions are, they're copies of the files that are saved. So if you have, let's say for instance, a Word document and you change that document every so often, after the backup's been going for a while, you'll actually have 10 copies of that file on the remote servers. And so one of the concerns is 10 files is going to take up a lot more room than one file would take up. But on the other hand, you'll have 10 copies of that file to actually retrieve if there was an issue. And so it depends on how you're using Expert Backup Now's services. If you're using them for catastrophic restores and you want to preserve as much space as possible so that you can back up more data as opposed to having the ability to go back and retrieve files that are older, you're going to want to lower this rule. So if you keep it at 10, you'll maintain 10 revisions of files as well as the main backup. And what that means, if we lower the number here, it'll be a little easier to explain. So if we make this 0 revisions means that you're going to have the last backup stored that was backed up, and so that's your live backup. If you make this 1, you're going to have the last backup that was stored, so that's every file you have, plus 1 revision, so that's 1 change file for every file that's changed. Now if you have files that never get changed, you're only going to have 1 version on there, but as soon as that file gets changed, it's going to save a revision based on this number for every file that changes. So if you have executables that you're backing up or files that are pictures that never get changed or something of that nature, you're only going to have 1. This revision rule doesn't completely apply to it because the file doesn't necessarily change. But if you've got large files or database files and they're 10 gig apiece and you keep 10 revisions, that's going to have a lot of space that you're going to take up. So think about that when you're doing your revision rules. Typically, if you're going to use this for catastrophic backups, which is what most people do, you're going to keep this revision number at 3 or less. But you can play around with that also and see how large your first couple of backups are and adjust this as necessary in the backup job. Now we're going to roll this up. We're going to go to the next option here, which is encryption type. Again, this is a setting that you're really not going to take any use of. You're going to keep it at the AES 256-bit encryption. That's the strongest encryption available on our software, and it's also stronger than any other option that's here. And so really the only reason you would change this is if you had a specific requirement for a specific industry, or maybe it's a specific country that requires a certain encryption level. But typically you're going to leave this at the highest level, which is this AES 256-bit encryption, and that's this military grade encryption. So typically you're just going to leave that alone. We'll go ahead and roll that up also. Under packaging type, we give you the option again to change this, but you want to store as much data on the offline servers as possible. You're not going to want to compress that, or not compress that data. You're going to want it compressed. And so if you turn this off, you'll actually end up taking up more storage space, and so you definitely want to keep it on gzip so that it actually has the data compressed when it's sent over, and you take up less room on the storage space that you've purchased. And those are the basic options. Again, we can go through, we can reset those per backup job at any time once we're in the software, but this is the next step in setting up the software. And we're going to click Next, and that's going to take us to the actual software, and from there in another video we'll go through, we'll set up our first backup job, and we'll go through some more options. There's a ton more options that we need to go through and that are available to set. Thanks for looking at our backup, and if you want to look at more backups, please visit us at expertbackupnow.com.